Forget the glossy brochures of ivy-covered brick walls and quiet libraries. If you went to college in Boston in the 1970s, your education did not start in a warm, comfortable lecture hall. It started on a brutal Tuesday morning on Commonwealth Avenue. It sounded like the ear-piercing, metallic screech of a Green Line trolley scraping against icy tracks. It felt like the heavy, damp weight of a wool coat soaked in gray street slush. Your breath hanging in the freezing air like thick white smoke as you braced yourself against the bitter wind whipping off the Charles River. Today, Boston is a polished, impossibly expensive city of gleaming glass towers and heavily gentrified neighborhoods. But the Boston of 50 years ago was entirely different. It was a gritty, unforgiving, and politically explosive town that demanded your survival just as much as your tuition. Which brings us to a question that anyone who lived through those years has probably asked themselves. How exactly did such a cold, cramped, and intensely chaotic city forge one of the most resilient generations in American history? In the next few minutes, we aren't just going to flip through faded yearbooks or talk about grade point averages. Instead, we are going to step back inside those drafty, off-campus apartments where ancient iron radiators clanked relentlessly through the freezing nights. We will breathe in the stale cigarette smoke that hung heavy over the basement stage at the Rat. Feel the desperate, physical rhythm of hammering typewriter keys at 2 in the morning. And relive exactly what it felt like when the violent realities of national politics bypassed the lecture halls and marched straight into your dormitory. This is the unvarnished story of coming of age in a city that refused to make anything easy for you. But before you could even worry about the deadline for tomorrow's term paper, you had to face the harsh reality of tonight's evening news broadcast. The isolation of the traditional academic bubble simply did not exist in Boston. In the early 1970s, the shadow of the Vietnam War hung over the narrow corridors of every dormitory like a suffocating winter fog. You couldn't just quietly focus on earning a degree. You were acutely aware that a violent chapter of national history was unfolding right outside your window. When news of the Kent State shootings and the Cambodian campaign broke in May 1970, the collective outrage didn't remain confined to political science lectures. It spilled directly onto the pavement. The tension was not abstract. It was entirely physical. At Boston University, the sheer scale of the unrest forced the administration to cancel undergraduate final exams entirely and suspend hundreds of classes as thousands of students flooded the streets. Across the river at MIT, the final semester for the class of 1970 dissolved into a chaotic blur of disrupted schedules and upended commencement plans. Yet, perhaps the most paralyzing memory of that era wasn't the roar of the protesting crowds, but the suffocating silence gathered around a crackling dormitory radio. It was the draft lottery. It was the sight of young men staring blankly at a cork bulletin board, tracing their fingers over their birth dates, waiting for a completely random number to dictate whether their next year would be spent arguing philosophy in a Cambridge coffeehouse, or carrying a rifle through a jungle halfway across the world. Even with the weight of a national crisis hanging over your head, you still had to physically get yourself to class. And the city of Boston never made that a gentle experience. To survive those brutal New England winters, you didn't wear lightweight synthetics. You armored yourself. You navigated the bone-chilling crosswinds of Commonwealth Avenue or the icy paths of Harvard Yard wrapped in stiff Army surplus jackets, thick corduroy pants, and heavy wool coats that smelled like damp sheep the moment you stepped out of the snow. The physical burden of being a student was undeniable. From the heavy canvas backpack cutting into your shoulders to the gray, salty street slush steadily seeping through your boots. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors of a campus building or a cramped Kenmore Square diner offered a stark, immediate contrast. You were instantly hit by a wall of suffocating heat from an overactive, clanking iron radiator, accompanied by the pungent aroma of cheap coffee perfectly masking the ever-present scent of stale cigarette smoke. The academic environment of the 1970s was entirely mechanical and profoundly loud. there was no silent typing on glowing screens. Instead, the dormitory hallways echoed with the aggressive, rhythmic clatter of heavy typewriter keys violently striking paper at 2 in the morning. Your education was entirely tangible. It smelled like the sharp chemical tang of fresh photocopier ink and the musty, comforting decay of old paper buried deep within the library stacks. If you can still vividly remember the exact smell of those freshly printed, wet pages, or the distinct metallic ping of your typewriter reaching the end of a margin, please leave a like on this video as a way to together honor those demanding, unforgettable days we weathered. That metallic ping was the soundtrack of a fiercely analog education, long before algorithms and search engines handed you instant answers on a glowing screen. Writing a term paper was a test of physical endurance. You spent countless hours wandering through the dimly lit, claustrophobic stacks of the campus library, flipping through the worn, alphabetized index cards housed in endless wooden drawers. A single typographical error on your final draft meant nervously painting over the ink with correction fluid, praying the page wouldn't tear when you forcefully rolled it back into the carriage. Exam days were universally marked by the frantic scratching of ballpoint pens desperately filling up the cheap, lined pages of pale blue books, your hand physically cramping as the clock ticked down. But that intense academic pressure was balanced by a social ecosystem that belonged exclusively to that specific window of the 1970s. When Massachusetts lowered the drinking age to 18 in 1973, the college nightlife fundamentally shifted. You didn't need a poorly forged ID to find a release from the week's stress. You just needed a few crumpled dollars in your pocket. Life outside the classroom revolved around sticky-floored, smoke-filled basement clubs like the Rathskeller, affectionately known as the Rat, right in the heart of Kenmore Square. It was an era defined by sharing cheap pitchers of beer over scarred wooden tables, the heavy bass of a corner jukebox vibrating through your boots, and the raw, unfiltered sounds of WBCN rock radio blasting into the early hours of the morning. Every one of us who survived those winters has a specific memory anchored in one of those loud, dimly lit student bars. Scroll down to the comments and share your story with us. What was your absolute favorite Boston hangout spot in the 1970s? And whose vinyl record were you listening to the most when you finally made it back to your dorm room? And blending into the heavy bass vibrating out of those Kenmore Square basements were the distinct voices of a generation actively reshaping the American identity. The spaces were defined entirely by the people who inhabited them. For the young women navigating campuses like Boston College or Harvard during the early days of Title IX, the daily college experience was a profound exercise in resilience. They marched across the freezing, windswept quads wrapped in heavy denim and thick wool coats, stepping into institutions that were quite literally built for men. Many found themselves assigned to drafty dormitories that had belonged to the men's football team just months prior, crowding around a single, inadequate bathroom mirror before early morning lectures. They were studying more fiercely than any generation of women before them, determined to secure their place. Yet they were still routinely subjected to the patronizing question of whether they were there to earn a degree or simply to find a husband. Meanwhile, the relentless economic realities of the 1970s, defined by soaring inflation and a looming energy crisis, meant that very few students were experiencing a carefree ride. Survival required constant hustle. It meant taking grueling night shifts at local pizza shops, pouring coffee at corner diners, or sorting mail in campus offices just to manage the steadily rising tuition. Students banded together, cramming into decaying, uninsulated off-campus apartments where the winter wind constantly rattled the loose window panes. They learned to stretch a few dollars for groceries, carefully hoarding precious quarters to drop into a scratched hallway payphone just to let their families know they were still surviving the city. Those relentless shifts at the corner diners and the shivering walks to the hallway payphone highlighted a fundamental truth about going to college here. Boston was never a closed, manicured campus. You didn't just learn inside the rigid walls of an academic building. Your true education came from navigating the entire city. The boundaries between the university and the urban grit were completely blurred. Your daily curriculum included dodging unpredictable traffic through the chaotic intersection of Kenmore Square, grabbing a slice of cheap pizza under the towering lights of Fenway Park, and letting the screeching brakes of the Green Line dictate your schedule. You belong to the concrete streets just as much as you belong to your graduating class. Nowhere was this raw collision of worlds more obvious than in Harvard Square. To the rest of the country, it was merely a sanitized symbol of elite Ivy League prestige. But to the students who actually walked its cracked pavement in the 1970s, it was a volatile, pulsing hub of cultural defiance. The air smelled heavily of roasting coffee beans and damp political flyers plastered over every available telephone pole. You rubbed shoulders with a chaotic mix of long-haired hippies, radical activists, and street musicians fiercely strumming acoustic guitars in front of cramped, independent bookstores that stayed open long into the freezing night. It was a shared third space where the established intellectual order constantly clashed with a youth culture desperate to rewrite the rules. Perhaps right now, you are thinking of the roommate who sat across from you in one of those smoky coffee houses, or the friend who always rode that freezing trolley into town with you on a Friday night. Take a moment to send this video to them, so the two of you can step back into that unforgiving, intensely alive version of Boston together. Every week, we dig deep to uncover and preserve these unvarnished, authentic pieces of American history. If you believe in keeping these raw memories alive for the next generation, please hit the subscribe button to join our community. Preserving that history means acknowledging that the Boston of the 1970s was a city deeply fractured along lines of race and class. You could not claim to truly know this town if you only stayed within the pristine walls of a university library. By 1974, the court-ordered desegregation of public schools plunged the city into a bitter, violent buzzing crisis. College students, reading about high-minded democratic ideals in their textbooks, walked out of class to witness a starkly different reality playing out on the asphalt. The intellectual capital of America was suddenly a city where yellow school buses required heavy police escorts, and the National Guard stood watch over neighborhood street corners. The tension vibrating through the local streets was palpable, teaching a generation that systemic fractures were not just abstract historical concepts, but immediate, physical realities unfolding right down the block. And if the volatile political climate didn't test your endurance, the brutal forces of nature certainly did. The defining test came with the historic blizzard of 1978. What started as a routine trip to watch a beanpot hockey game quickly devolved into a survival scenario as 27 inches of blinding snow completely paralyzed the region. Thousands of abandoned cars lay buried on the highways, and students found themselves stranded inside the freezing confines of the Boston Garden, sleeping on concrete floors. The city did not just educate you through rigorous syllabi, it aggressively tested your physical limits and your capacity to endure the completely unpredictable. And then, almost in a historical blink of an eye, that raw, untamed version of Boston quietly slipped away. The drinking age was inevitably pushed back, abruptly silencing the chaotic, youthful energy that once flooded the local basement clubs. The Rat eventually locked its heavy wooden doors, and the fiercely independent bookstores of Harvard Square slowly surrendered to a new, sterile reality. There were no grand farewells or press releases, just a gradual paving over of memories. The gritty, smoke-stained corners of Kenmore Square were steadily replaced by sanitized corporate storefronts, burying a defining, unapologetic era of student life beneath polished glass and pristine steel. Of course, this journey only captures a small fraction of that massive, sprawling city. Did we miss a crucial detail about how student life actually operated back then? Please, add your own pieces of history in the comments below to ensure our collective picture of that era is entirely complete. The pale blue exam books have long since crumbled, and those drafty brick dormitories have been entirely rebuilt. Yet, the profound resilience, the quiet defiance, and the sheer grit forged by those freezing Boston winters remain permanently woven into the fabric of our generation. Going to college in Boston during the 1970s wasn't merely about earning a piece of paper. It was about surviving a profoundly turbulent city, and in the process, defining exactly who we would become